got 3 new recovery tips for bigger arms or whatever it is you're after. This is the kind of thing I talk about in the book, Massive Muscular Arms, published by Human Kinetics. And it's time to jump forward about 20 years in terms of our knowledge and subsequent application. So let's jump into the clip from the Iron Radio podcast. Mike teed me up perfectly here. And he mentioned muscle wasting in spaceflight. And this was directly aligned with the research I did for NASA at the Johnson Space Center. And what we had found was that something as simple as touch of the skin, just the touch of the skin, was able to mitigate muscle wasting by as much as 80%.
What? So
the cutaneous, the sensory system, is having a massive impact on other tissues, in particular muscle. But there's a lot of neural feedback going on. There's a lot of feels, you might say. So most recently, credit to Dr. John Russin for coming up with this, is a parasympathetic recovery period. And this is a game changer. Anybody can do this. After a workout or anytime you want to relax, deep diaphragmatic breathing, coupled with a specific posture, and that is lying on your back with your knees and your hips at 90 degrees. So basically putting your calves up on a bench. That's all it is. Not your feet, your calves. And then removing sensory stimulation from the very sensory dense areas of your body. So like the bottom of your foot, palms of your hands, and your face. So I take my glasses off. And then deep diaphragmatic breathing. And that sensory deload, coupled with the parasympathetic activation of the diaphragmatic breathing, is just incredible. I do it after every workout, and I do it before I go to sleep.
Interesting.
So that is number one, because anybody can do it, and it's simple.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Now, Mike, haven't you done sensory deprivation tanks?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that idea. Is that right, Dave? Like limit sensory input just to be able to be as parasympathetic as possible.
You know, I've never made that connection. That is exactly why I love these conversations, because now I get to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. I mean, if I had access to a tank, even I had written down this in my notes once I'm back home, is ideally I would do it, like once a week, like on a Sunday or maybe after my harder training sessions, or ideally before the beginning of the week. Normally what I'll see is heart rate variability changes will go up. You can get fancy and use stuff like Omega Wave to try to look at DC potential, which, may be a marker for grossly brain function and stuff. But you talk to a lot of other high-level coaches, they'll see similar things where it will tend to normalize like the next day. And similar to what Dave was saying too, you're just trying to remove as much sensory information as possible, right? You're lying in 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, so you're floating. The water temp is about the same temp as your skin. There's no sound, there's no light. And I'll actually use that too for trying to solve problems. So like when I came up with a system for the Flex Diet Cert, I would then go lock myself in a float chamber for 90 minutes, get into a relaxed state, and then try to disprove the system I came up with. And then I'll leave myself like 45 minutes afterwards from once I get out just to, draw out some notes and that type of thing too. So, because you're removing all of their inputs, right? So you're left with, kind of whatever you're thinking about at that point.
Right. And I think what Dave's putting forward is that kind of approach. I mean, obviously not everybody can get in a sensory deprivation tank.
Right.
But some a portion of that to get some real recovery, nervous system recovery and gains and stuff like that. That's very cool. Not to keep mining here, Dave, but what about other things that you might suggest?
I got one more for the nervous system, and then I think another one for muscle that kind of all ties back to each of us. The nervous system, the reason I like to emphasize this is because it goes back to what we were talking about the beginning of the conversation, and that is sleep and sleep deprivation. And there is so much that we can do to facilitate our sleep. And I think one of the fundamental problems with our not doing so is the lack of perceived control that people seem to have over their own sleep. And it's really interesting to me. I had an athlete who mentioned to me that she could not maintain a consistent sleep cycle because Fridays were the night when her buddies went out drinking. And it took me a second to make the connection. But what she was saying was her buddies go out drinking, ergo, she must too go out drinking. And it was just so mind-blowing that I almost didn't know how to respond. So the perception of control over our own sleep habits is, I think, the most fundamental. And I know it's not quite sexy because I mean, I've got a dozen different sleep tips. Cool. But if you're not maintaining a consistent sleep schedule, which for the most part, people have more control over than they realize. So it's not to point a finger at anyone. It's to empower people to really reflect on how much control you have. So then you are more incentivized to maintain a consistent sleep cycle and use the tips that we can offer to do so.
Yeah.
There's one more. I don't know if you guys have comments on that, but I can jump right into the muscle. And this is something I mentioned in a protein book from many years ago. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this. Protein Resistance Training. Pretty good book. But it is actually a concept called protein pulse feeding. And I'm really proud to have presented this in some earlier work, a book I published in 2008. And the concept was actually validated by independent peer-reviewed research published several years later. And the idea is to use rapid increases in blood amino acid levels through, consuming a whey protein drink. Simple way to do it. The trick is you have to be fasted. And that rapid influx of amino acids triggers the muscle to induce protein synthesis. That's the growth, recovery, adaptation effect that we're really after. And you know what? You can do it again. After a couple hours, do the same thing, and you're going to get the same spike in blood amino acid levels. It's very similar to spiking insulin, which I appreciate is no longer in fashion, but the benefits are increasing that muscle protein synthesis, which is not just recovery-based, it's adaptive. It facilitates adaptation. So it's simple. I think most people use whey protein anyway. And that's really the goal, is to find things that everyone can use. So those are my top three right there.
All right, so let me get some nuance on this just quickly then. So when I lift, and admittedly, my goal is not to take up as much space as possible as it once was, but I also don't want to beat my joints up and not get much return. So I should not be sipping whey during my session at the gym. I should just lift and then slam it afterward. Is that fair?
The part about sipping, actually all of it, it really depends on when your previous meal was. So for this, the protein pulse feeding to work, you have to be in a protein fasted state. So if you've eaten within a few hours of the workout, the workout itself doesn't matter. That's not going to change your protein synthetic response to the protein pulse feeding.
Okay.
I mean, I straight up picked up my life, moved from Toronto to Texas to study workout, post-workout window, and protein. It's like, oops, that didn't work out. But the previous meal does matter. The timing of the previous meal does matter. So if you've eaten, sipping whey protein, probably not going to make a difference. It's not harmful, but ideally you want to be in a protein fasted state before slamming your drink, irrespective of workout.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Phil, I know we're just running out of time here, but you're a fan of eating before you lift. But I think
that's much more important to me.
So. And that's just so you can feel sated and energized, essentially.
Yeah, just have the energy to go. That's always been more important to me than after. Because I see all these people, I'm going to go into work, my workout starved and this and that, and they're all worried about this post-workout window. Yeah, you just had a shitty workout because you were starving. I'd rather have a killer workout and then, I'm going to eat over the next 24 to 48 hours before I do it again. I'm not going to fast for that long. So it's always been more important to me, those hours and the evening before. allowing myself to have a good training session.
Well, it seems like that next 24 hours, and that's when what Dave is saying that would come into play. So what about the refractory period? How many times a day? Are we talking about like 4 times a day that you're just going to go from essentially fasted to, ramp up those amino acids aggressively? What would be your tip there?
The most that I've tried this is 3 times, 3 consecutive meals like this, and my GI did not like it. There was significant distress from consuming consecutive liquid meals. Okay. So for me, the most I would ever do this is 2 consecutive meals and then just start hitting the solid food. A simple way to do this, even if you're not going to do consecutive rapid whey drinks, rapidly absorbed whey drinks, just do it first thing in the morning. When you wake up, have a whey protein drink, and it's going to give you that stimulation of protein synthesis. And again, it's irrespective of workout. This happens to every human, whether or not they've lifted a day in their lives.
Okay. Well, all right, let's recap here. So we've defined recovery. It's nuanced, and I think people need to think about that. And I don't want people going to Phil and Mike and being like, help me with my recovery. You got to bring more specific questions, people, what do you mean? What are your symptoms? Where do you feel depleted? Where do you feel like you're not back to baseline and ready to go? That kind of stuff. Talked about some systems approach to all this kind of stuff. Specific evidence that Dave's sharing about, surging amino acids or even like the relative amount of sensory deprivation to try to calm that fight or flight reflex, right? And get some parasympathetic kicking. That's worthwhile stuff, I think, to take into this week and chew on. Just quickly, if people want to learn more about what you're doing, David, what would they do?
If you're looking for more recovery or training tips to get massive muscular arms, head over to armbar.com. Check out the book while you're there. Thanks to the Iron Radio team, Dr. Lonnie Lowry, Dr. Mike T. Nelson, and Phil Stevens. Thanks also to Dr. John Russin, the PPSC Pain-Free Performance Specialist Certification, and the rest of the PPSC team. Thanks for watching. I'm David Barr, and until next time, raise the bar.